What is the fastest you have ever seen a new coworker get fired? Story 1. 4 or so hours. When I was 18, I got a job at a grocery store along with 3 others. We all started training together. On the first day, we were training in the evening and one girl asked to go home. She said that her head hurt. They said fine. She clocked out and went to grab a grocery cart and started filling it with beer and liquor. The store manager walked over and asked her if she was having a party. She said yes. Didn't even try to come up with an excuse. Just, yeah, I am, so I needed to leave early on my first day, basically. He fired her. Reminds me of a housekeeper who called in sick one day saying he had a headache. Showed up an hour later with his girlfriend to go swimming in the pool. Asked him what he was doing there, and he said he felt better and decided to come in for a swim. Fired him on the spot. I worked in a hotel restaurant and stuck my neck out to get a friend his first line cook job. He called in sick on day 3 because he'd hurt his hand. The chef came to me the next day, straight up stunned, and asked if I knew the guy had been seen during his missed shift drinking in the hotel's bar. My friend's answer when I pressed him, I can drink with the other hand, what's the big deal? If you're reading this, Larry, screw you, man. This kind of stuff is why I wrote you off. I worked at Pizza Hut as a driver all 5 years of college. Never called out, never had any problems, A+ employee, and got along with my manager's coworkers, etc. Also, played for a club team that tragically scheduled our end-of-season party last minute on a Friday I was supposed to work. It was also like my 4th to last shift, and I was graduating and moving across the country, so screw all anyway, but still. I didn't realize you weren't supposed to do this, but I told my manager I wasn't coming in because I was going to my team's party. The next time I went in, everyone was like, how the fuck did you get away with that? Because I guess my manager was telling everybody that he couldn't even be mad, and that he was actually kind of impressed that I was so nonchalant about the fact that I was calling out for my college BS. Story 2. He didn't show up on the first day, second day, or third day. I had to work a double shift for 3 days straight. Not fun. I answered the phone when he finally called in on the 4th day. He said, I'm gonna be honest with you. I've been in Orlando. My parents paid for a small vacation as a reward for getting the job. Would it be okay to start next week instead of this week? I used to buy weed from a girl like this. She would cook sometimes, and it was stuff like mushroom soup and ground beef, which wasn't that bad, but she acted like she was an amazing cook. She had this sort of thing where she would make friends with a group of people and screw her way through the guys. She banged 3 of the people in my group of friends. She always left her door unlocked. She had a ton of customers, and I think someone sold her out one day. She got robbed by a couple of guys at gunpoint. Anyways, she left some crap on the stove too long because those guys robbed her, and it must have started a grease fire. The next thing I knew, there was a huge flash that sent me flying through the air and into a wall. I was completely dazed, bleeding from my head, chest, arms, stomach, and legs. There was a tremendous ringing in my ears and my body was shaking. At first, I was bleeding so badly I thought I was going to die, but my bleeding was quickly stopped by all the bandages that my buddy George placed on me. The fight raged around me and the machine gunner, who was also wounded from the bomb blast. Finally, our sergeant called in helicopter gunships and saved us. The Viet Cong left 4 dead and many blood trails. I have a somewhat similar story. I interviewed at Best Buy and got through all 3 stages. The manager said she was going to hire me, so I was super excited. We started talking about the start date and getting scheduled for a drug test. The date she gave me happened to fall on a vacation I was going on with my family. I told her why that date wouldn't work and asked if we could push it back 1 week. She said she couldn't do that and said this won't work out and thanks for my time. So I was hired and let go in the same conversation. Story 3. The guy got hired and went through training and all that jazz. The first day on the floor, he disappeared for 3 hours and then came back high as hell on like meth or something. A manager found him in the bathroom aisle, staring at himself in the mirror. Said manager looked at the cameras after firing him. The guy was there staring at himself for at least 30 minutes. Similar story, but not drugs or booze. I was on a panel interview for this individual, but wasn't the candidate's hiring manager. We'll call him Fred. Everyone on the panel all agreed Fred would make a good candidate, and followed through with hiring him. A few weeks go by while we handle HR stuff. Then he shows up for his first day of work. Onboarding training starts, and he's doing fine, so midday he goes for lunch and comes back 2 hours later. No big deal, may have gotten lost, since he lives about an hour away from our office. Later in the day, the person sitting near him flags a manager and says he's acting strange. The other manager pulls me aside and asks if I noticed anything. I hadn't had much interaction with Fred since lunch, and brushed it off as the first day at a new job nerves. Day 2, Fred comes in, gets back to onboarding training, and later heads out for lunch. He's gone for 3 hours this time. Comes back, sits down in a chair, and literally falls out of it. I go over to check on him, and he slurs his speech while calling me the wrong name. He then launches into a tirade about a coworker's nose ring and how it's against Trump. Also starts in on another coworker, saying the coworker has no idea about chemistry. We're IT folks, so why chemistry came up I'll never know. There were some other shenanigans while we got a hold of his hiring manager, who convinced Fred that he had a scheduled meeting in one of our meeting rooms, and my director, who had been instant messaging about the incident, was already sending HR to meet him in that meeting room. Turns out the dude was getting sauced on hard alcohol during his lunch breaks. For full stupidity, we had a company-stocked beer fridge. The guy was bringing in his own hard stuff though. Had to call a cab to take him home after HR basically told him to never come back, and the company computed the greater than 1 hour cab ride home because no way in hell could this individual drive. Scary that he drove home the first day. Googling around for Fred's full name showed he had previous DUI and domestic abuse charges. We imagine he was in a pretty bad place. So yeah, 2 days is the shortest amount of time I've seen a new guy last. I used to do resets for Home Depot. This one night a new recruit disappeared, but I didn't have time to go look for him. An hour later, the HD night manager comes and gets me. He asks me to follow him. Silently, we walk towards the outdoor plant area. When we get there, he points down, and lo and behold, there's my missing worker, passed out with a syringe hanging out of his arm. Called the paramedics and the police, who revived him and then arrested him. This is the garbage that temp employment companies send to us all the time. Story 4. Before their first day of orientation, I got hired for a manufacturing job through Manpower, a temp agency. Me and a friend of my wife were both supposed to start on Monday at the plant for a week-long orientation. She got into a fender bender on her way to orientation and called them to say that she'd be a bit late, that she just needed to wait on the police to give a statement. The manager told her to not bother ever coming in. The girl was torn up. She took pictures and the police report to the hiring manager and tried to explain things to the company HR managers, but no dice. She was fired before ever clocking in. That sucks. I got rear-ended on my way to day 1 of a new job, and they were very understanding until I tested positive for codeine on the drug test that I took the next day. Luckily, I was able to submit my EOB from the hospital where they gave the drugs to me, but they were ready to fire me over it. I got rear-ended on my way to a job at a swanky hotel. I told the guy who hit me to just give me his name and number and we would settle up after lunch. At lunch, I call him and we exchange info. When my gig was over, I called the valet to get my truck. I walk up and the valet hands me my keys. The valet was the guy who rear-ended me. He was apologetic, seeing as he had only seen the back of my truck, and since they park cars backwards, he did not put 2 and 2 together. Nice enough kid. His insurance took care of everything. A dash cam works wonders. Story 5. I called a temp agency to get someone to help me count inventory. They sent a guy over with a cast on his arm. That was my first WTF, but I went with it because we were just counting parts. Then I came back from lunch and this dude was in my office chair, zoned out and drooling on himself with a can of air duster in his lap. I kicked him awake and escorted him out of my warehouse. Never used that temp agency again. There was an older brother of a friend who was a pretty big stoner. He got a job at one of those drive-up coffee huts in a pretty small town. A line of cars formed in their morning rush and no one was serving anyone, but the lights were on. You know, the place was clearly open. Someone called the owner and she came out and opened the door to find a friend's older brother lying in the middle of the floor with a broken flavor syrup bottle all over him. He had been doing whippets and knocked a shelf down on himself and passed out. He was okay, but yeah, he was fired. I had a job for 1 day counting inventory once and almost got fired. Instead, I was yelled at in front of the 50 or so coworkers about how stupid I was. It was the first inventory in a huge bookshop, basically a job in paradise for me. The job was simple enough: count the books and double check with the spreadsheet they gave you. We got very detailed instructions on how to do that. Now here's the kicker. We were instructed to first lay down all the books in a particular row on their spines, going from left to right. Go back to the left side, and one by one, put the book back up again while counting. so you know you didn't miss a book or something. After a while, I realized that I could just start counting while putting the books on the spine. So after I was done counting, all the books in the row were down, and I put them quickly back up again. So the boss saw that I did it differently from how he told us, started yelling at me about how I'm too stupid to follow the simplest instruction and stuff like that. I thought it was a misunderstanding and told him that I did in fact count the books, but he wasn't having any of that. I wasn't fired, but I did leave early and never went into that store again. Story 6. The new guy started on Monday and was gone by Friday. The guy hit some racking in the warehouse with a forklift. The boss saw him do it, and the guy decided to lie about it when asked if he knew what happened. Usually, that's an instant on-the-spot drug and breathalyzer test. I've run into a few things with a JLG lift before. The worst was knocking a stacked pile of steel pallets over when I nudged it lightly with a tire. I had properly blocked off the aisle with tape and cones, and no one was near me or it. I thought, ah crap, I'm screwed. One of the fork truck drivers came running over and said, "Don't worry about it, I'll clean it up," all frantic, like apparently he's/you're not allowed to stack them more than 2 high due to the fact that they don't interlock and love to slide around. Also coated in oil drippings, so extra slippery. This stack had to be at least 8 high. Ha! So much friggin' noise even for a plant. I worked for a big home improvement store that I won't name. All I can say is the stores are orange. We had a guy come into work drunk and run one of the forklifts into the outdoor storage racks with customers around. Another employee forcibly removed him from the lift and dragged him into the back. The dude was given 2 options: walk and potentially face criminal charges, or go to an inpatient treatment center on the company's dime, and his job would be there if he wanted it after he got out. I can honestly say it's the one actually good thing I ever saw the company do at a corporate level. Story 7. This was just a summer job at a fast food place. We had a new girl start, and within 2 days it was apparent that she was an idiot, and everyone knew that. You could already see the manager questioning his decision. Then, on her 3rd day of work, she said she couldn't come in because her mom was in a car accident and in the hospital. Turns out that's an easy thing to disprove in a relatively small town. Semi-related, but back in high school I tried to call out by saying I had car trouble, and it had been towed. My boss then says, "Oh, no problem. I have to pick up my daughter from practice, who is out by you anyway, so I can give you a ride." I ended up driving my car out behind my house and parked it on the lawn to hide it, and took his ride. Pretty awkward conversation with my parents later about why the car was in their backyard, and my boss was dropping me off. I knew a girl who tried this as a reason for a no-show at an old job. She told the company owner that her mother was in a car accident and was brain dead. Amazingly though, the doctors managed to pull her through and she'll be fine. Her BS got called quickly when the owner asked her which hospital she was in and for the name of the doctor so she could make a generous donation for such an amazing surgeon. Story 8. I was fired on my 2nd day as a line cook at a Mitzel's restaurant in Washington State back in the 90s. Turns out I was hired just to threaten the job security of a longtime line cook with an attitude problem to keep him in line. He got the message and apologized to the manager, and I was fired for breaking a yolk when flipping fried eggs one time. I'd been a line cook for a few years by then and thought I was doing pretty good. I was taken out the back door and terminated on day 2. This is an obscure HR technique I have seen a few times. Back in the Vietnam War, the boot camp recruits were mostly drafted and had an attitude. A young experienced soldier pretended to be a recruit and was talking crap on the entire bus ride. Offloaded at boot camp, and on the first day he tells the drill sergeant to F off, and when sergeant gets in his face, the guy pushes him away. Sergeant acts like he is kicking the crap out of him, magazines taped to his stomach inside his uniform, and the recruit bites onto ketchup packets, so red stuff is oozing from his mouth. As the unit is ordered to march away, other sergeants come over and act like a 3-on-1 beatdown. When asked, the sergeant says Recruit X was never here. Need 5 guys for a job? Hire 6 and fire 1 on the first day. Story 9. This was a while ago at my old job. A new guy gets hired as a busboy. He was super annoying and tried to insert himself into everyone's conversation whether they wanted him there or not. It only took a couple of hours for the whole restaurant to hate him. I was working at the bar and he kept eating the bar fruit. I personally didn't care, but the manager did. The manager comes over and tells him to stop eating the fruit. He looks the manager in the eye and eats another piece of the fruit. The manager says, "Really?" Followed by, "Come with me to the office." The new guy promptly replies replies with, "Alright man, calm down, I can tell you got that big dick energy for a good reason," followed by a cliche wink and a nudge from his elbow, in front of me and like 4 other employees. I wanted to slam my face into the ice bin. It was so cringy to witness. He promptly walked out the front door 10 minutes later without his uniform on anymore. The worst thing about it was the manager was an insanely laid-back guy. Hell, the whole restaurant was insanely laid back. You really had to try hard to get fired from this place. Had he not thrown in that big dick line, I'm almost positive he would have just gotten a slap on the wrist and kept the job. I worked construction my whole life. There are many stories I have, but this one in particular sticks out to me. A new hire for hanging drywall, a big enough guy who did not know drywall. I was the foreman and called my boss, the owner, and told him to find someone else. Well, to say he was a nice guy is an understatement. He gave the guy a full week to work and he called off 2 days. So my boss brought the checks to the site and asked him what's the deal, and this guy without missing a beat said, and I quote, "Look at all the money I saved you." I busted out laughing and had to walk away. Well, he was never seen again. Story 10. The IT crew at a large government office worked on a ticket system, meaning that the government workers submitted their problems online and one of the IT guys would pick it up on their end. And the new guy just started his first day, logged into a computer at an empty office and submitted a reinstall entire OS request so that he could spend all day there. The manager decided to check in on him before lunch to see how he was doing, and he was completely asleep, fired before they even finished his hiring paperwork. I was a developer at a small startup once, and the lead developer only worked nights because he had another full-time job. The president of the company said that he felt bad for the guy because he would come in some nights and see him asleep at his computer. I was shocked that even the president of the company works badly for a sleeping employee. Then, years later, I was working on a government contract and noticed initials on the code history that seemed familiar. I asked another developer and he confirmed it was the same guy, and he would see him asleep in his cubicle all the time. Story 11. I used to do a lot of field work on-site investigation programs. Basically, we'd hang on a drill rig while the drillers took rock cores. We'd log the cores, take photos, do some downhole tests, etc. New engineer gets sent to the site and gets assigned the night shift. Some people love night shift, but most people don't, hence sticking the junior with night shift. After 5 nights, he calls the office and says he wants to come home because it's freezing and he hates it and he can't do it. Not clear to me if he quit or got fired, but it became plain pretty quickly that his job wasn't for him. I got pulled onto that program and I asked the drillers what the guy's deal was. They had a propane heater in the back of their van, and despite repeated invitations to sit in the back of the van, the buddy just sat in his truck all night and shivered in the middle of February. My brother was a mudlogger back in the 1980s. When there was a worldwide shortage of petroleum geologists, he basically wrote his own ticket. He'd sign on for the duration of a project, say 8 to 10 weeks. He'd work 12 hours, 7 days a week. The money was damn good, and you had to keep the mudloggers happy, so meals, a bunk for dozing, good heating, and AC. We pay for your lodging. He'd take his fortune, goof off for a couple of months, then sign on to a new project. When not working, he lived with my retired parents. When he wasn't working, they took extended trips. They got a free house sitter, and he got a big house with a swimming pool as a rent-free bachelor pad. It was a dream gig for a footloose single guy. Story 12. Spent my summers in college working as a laborer for a construction company. Anyway, we were doing a bunch of renovations in an active hospital, so noise and dust were a huge concern. We were a small crew and just starting renovations in an area with a super tight schedule, so the company hired a subcontractor for some of the work. Enter these 2 clowns who show up to do some demolition work. Foreman gives them the talk about how they may be used to doing things a certain way, but this is an active hospital, so he'd rather the work take longer than for them to make a huge mess or a lot of noise. An hour later, we apparently got multiple complaints about the noise and the mess, so the foreman called me up and said to go over there and clean up now, and that he'd be by shortly to see what the hell was going on. These dudes had dust and broken walls everywhere. I could hear them halfway down the hall, just smashing away without a care in the world. The foreman shows up and we walk into the room to witness this dude standing on a pile of rubble, swinging a sledgehammer over his head at a brick wall that he's removed the bottom from. Somehow the rest of this wall is still hanging from the ceiling. I have no idea how. Guy wasn't even wearing a hard hat, apparently oblivious that at any moment that wall might give away and crush him. The foreman lost his mind on these guys, kicked them out immediately, got on the phone with their company and told them he didn't want to see these guys on site again. Lots of choice 4-letter words were used, even threatening to fire the subcontractor entirely and get someone else to do the work. These sound like the kind of guys that are currently rebuilding the front of my rented house. They storm in, day 1, 7 of them by the way, singing, shouting, swearing at 9 o'clock, and start demolishing the front of the house from the inside. Zero dust, splinter, or brick plastic mat things. There were literally inch-wide chunks of brick. I'm in my mom's bed. It took about 2 hours to clean all the house up after they put up a stud wall, which consisted of one crappy plyboard gaffer taped to the wall, so poorly you can literally see daylight around it. It's been 4 weeks since then, and they haven't come for nearly 2 weeks straight because my mom wouldn't allow an unscheduled on-the-spot access to cut a hole in the crappy stud wall in the front room, which was currently being used, so they can put the 20-year-old blown-out windows back in, which my landlord said he'd have refurbished or replaced if too messed up. He hasn't. She has been given 2 weeks of come at 8 o'clock and do it, any day but Friday. Day 9 still not coming even after the landlord emailed saying they'd come the next day twice. Oh, and our router has been plugged in outside for nearly 4 weeks now. Through storms and crap, completely protected from rain by one crappy tarp my mum gaffer taped onto it, very poorly as she was leaning into unsafe crappy building work. How it hasn't been tripped yet, I don't know. Maybe there's a god because it's a bloody miracle. My landlord isn't free from the crap behavior either. This is a job he said will need to be done in the next few years. 8 years ago, my mom ended up going to the council because it was a building health and safety violation and sick of the it'll be done next summer. I personally gave him the benefit of the doubt and thought maybe he or one of his 2 Nigerian, literally from Nigeria where he had to buy at least 1 confirmed, wives, had some crippling gambling drug addiction. Until recently, I didn't realize he drove a Mercedes and also turns out, from his LinkedIn profile we found, has been taking private pilot lessons. The prick. The absolute wanker. This isn't Brazil. This is a decent part of a semi-countryside UK town. He's been a next-level knob over 10K. We've paid $650 a month for nearly 9 years. Also done 1 of 8, nearly 9, annual gas inspections. Also, going back to your comment about being a laborer when you were in American college, there is a 60-year-old laborer in the company he hired. That's 1 yike. A single yike. On top of all that, my mum is very physically disabled. EDS in case anyone wants to know. And my dad, who I personally haven't spoken to in years, but has ominously threatened us all many times, recently was wanted for the brutal hammer face smashing of an old lady who owed him 200 pounds. He's now in prison, so it's nice not to have to worry about the situation at least. Safe to say, we're going to sue the landlord. Sorry for the rant. It was pretty salty. Story 13. First week, he's called over to the unstaffed truffle counter by a customer. Hasn't been trained in truffles, so he just grabs one from the display case and sells it to the customer. He doesn't know the display truffles are made of plastic and the customer has already paid $90 for it when he realizes. Still not sure if it was an honest mistake or if he was planning to pocket the money. Either way, fired. So the customer paid someone and that person did not get the item. A random worker answered the customer's call for help but wasn't trained on this task. Tries to help but messes up, and the worker is fired and not the manager who has such a poor system that a customer could only find an untrained worker who felt inclined to try and help. This is the truest story here and it makes me sad. Dude, from someone who had to work a lot of crappy jobs to put myself through school and or just live when I was a young adult, one of the most important lessons I learned, especially at a lot of low-level jobs, is that trying to be the enthusiastic, helpful go-getter they talk about in the job descriptions backfires more often than not. I can't even tell you how many times when I was young and naive, managers would get pissed off at me for trying to take initiative or frustrated by me asking a lot of questions trying to figure stuff out. On the other hand, mindlessly doing a really mediocre job and not attempting to do anything I wasn't explicitly asked to do by a supervisor worked quite well. Occasionally, you get some actually solid managers who appreciate it, but generally I find it's the wrong approach until you have settled in quite a bit. Story 14. I got hired as a long-term temp with one other person to do some basic data entry work at a major brand that pretty much everyone has heard of. And it was at their corporate headquarters, so pretty prestigious. Anyway, we went through all of this onboarding stuff in the morning that required us to get photo IDs and figure out parking and all that stuff. Then, after 2 or 3 hours, we were introduced to one of the employees in our new department who began going over what we were going to be doing. None of it seemed overly difficult, and I figured that while it was a new system I had never used before, I'd be able to work it out in a few days as long as I asked questions and took notes. And that was the thing that made me realize that the other person who got hired with me probably lied on her resume and was completely out of her depth. She didn't take any notes and didn't ask any questions, and whenever I glanced at her, I could see flashes of panic on her face. Well, lunchtime came, and when we came back, she said that another company had called her and offered her a permanent position, and she couldn't work with us any longer. Both me and the person training us knew what was going on, but I'll give the other lady credit for finding a way out without losing face too badly. The takeaway here is, yes, fake it until you make it can and does work, but you gotta be able to fake it. You can't fake faking it. Exactly. Gotta do it right. My aunt, many moons ago, as a young woman, applied to a well-paid job as a secretary. The interview went well and she typed really well and quickly. There was a test. And then she was asked if she could also do stenography, which she answered in the affirmative. It was also a lie. You bet she went and took lessons and got books on it immediately and was up to a fairly good ability by the time the job actually started. This is how fake it until you make it actually works. One of my previous IT jobs, I had an interview where they asked some questions about network security that I had vague knowledge of, but not in depth. They called me back for a second interview, and I spent a good amount of time over the next few days reading up on the topics they had asked. When I went into the interview after small talk, I jumped in and went, "So you previously asked me about XYZ, and I was a little nervous, but here's what my answers should have been." Later on, one of the people on my interview panel told me that he had largely locked in his vote for me to be hired. He said he didn't care if I'd known it or not previously. Either I had, which was what they wanted, or I'd researched it and taught myself enough about it in the next few days to look knowledgeable. Both were acceptable in his eyes. Story 15. My sister was fired on day 1. My dad had his own small medical practice and would hire me and my sisters as our first job to be his receptionist and file insurance claims, so we could get some workplace experience before we went job hunting in the larger world. My older sister worked for him in high school for a year. I worked for him for 2 years, then it came time for my younger sister to take over. I brought her to work to start training and said the #1 rule in the office was, at work, he's not dad, he's the doctor and the boss. She sassed him in front of a patient on her first day with all the venom and sarcasm a teenage girl can muster when dealing with a parent asking her to do something. He fired her on the spot and I had to drag her out of there. Mom told her at least she got paid for a couple of hours, that she managed to be employed. Story 16. We had a new guy come in, go through all of the training on starting in our factory, locked out tag out, and all of that stuff. Said he was an electrician. Then the very first job he was asked to do, he was found working on a machine with the power locked on. There are so many things wrong with that in an industrial setting. It's unbelievable. My boss pulled him out of the machine, said, "You're too stupid to work here," and walked him out of the building. I think he was an actual employee there for 3 days at that point, and this was his first day actually on the production floor and not in training. Bonus story because I apparently can't read. We had a guy go through the interview process, come in for his first day, take a tour of the plant, and go to his car and go home. It was a lime, no not the fruit, processing plant. 2500F, 1400C kilns that turn limestone into activated lime. The whole place is filthy and dirty all the time. Everything about that job sucked. I made it 4 months before the crap management and crap working conditions outweighed the pay. I am not surprised we had so many people quit within the first couple of days or weeks of employment there, but this one guy was the fastest. To go along with this for the fastest person to quit, we had a guy hired on a Wednesday or Thursday to start on Monday. Monday comes around and he walks in a good 30 minutes early and on his cell phone. He walked briskly by my office and said hello. He didn't acknowledge the existence of anyone else in the office, just walked through the admin hallway and out of the warehouse. Never saw him again. I still laugh about it. I never understood why he bothered to come into the office at all. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.